There's a strange kind of hunger that we rarely talk about. It's the pain of being ignored. It's this emptiness that remains after we've been seen, but not really known. See, this is the one that this episode today is gonna dive into a bit more. We we live in this unprecedented time of visibility. Our lives are documented and shared, liked, even admired. And yet underneath this glow of exposure is this cold and quiet hollowness, a truth that many of us don't dare to name. We're getting attention, but we're really starving for intimacy. And worse, some of us have built this entire identity around being noticed, while simultaneously we're burying the parts of ourselves that most need to be known. This is what happens, I believe, when performance replaces presence, when charisma outpaces connection, and when who we are is really swallowed by who we think we have to be just to earn a moment of closeness. This isn't just a problem for influencers or extroverts or people who are on stages. I think it's a cultural condition, this quiet epidemic. And many of us grew up without the language or the safety to express our inner world. But somewhere along the way, we got the message that our worth was really tied to our output or our excellence or our emotional neatness. And when those things got us praise or proximity, we learned to double down. We learned to impress instead of to reveal. We learned to entertain instead of actually being known. See, it's easy to think of attention as a pathway to love, right? After all, when we're hurting, being noticed feels kind of like connection, doesn't it? But here's the truth. Attention is not intimacy, and performance is not presence. See, we're not just disconnected, we're actually disoriented. And we confuse applause for acceptance, and we mistake recognition for relationships. And in doing so, we find ourselves endlessly visible, but utterly alone. And we begin to sense that something's wrong, but we can't quite name it. So we keep polishing the persona, we keep producing, we keep being on. And all this while, the truest parts of us are really dying in the silence behind the mask that we wear. It's not that we don't want to be known, it's that we're terrified that if we were known, we'd be rejected. And so we keep hiding in plain sight. But consider this paradox here. The more we perform to be loved, the more distant we feel when love finally does come. We know deep down that love isn't really for us, and it's for the version that we're presenting, the self that we've engineered, the armor that hides our. That's what they love, not the true us. And that's what breaks us quietly over time. It's not the rejection of who we are, but the applause for who we're not. And this isn't just personal, I think it's cultural, like I said. We've built this entire economy around performance. We reward people for being, not for being whole as much as they're being impressive, not for being honest as much as for being on brand. And yet in our quietest moments, we're longing and aching for more. We don't just want someone to see our highlight reel. We want someone to sit beside us in our mess. We want someone who isn't fooled by our polish. We want someone who can recognize the flicker of fear behind the confidence we portray. Someone who won't run away when we finally stop performing. And that's the terrifying costs of this cultural attention addiction, if you will. We don't just lose our sense of connection, we begin to lose our sense of self. When all we are is who we are to others, when our self-worth is determined by how well we perform connection, it's then that intimacy becomes something we simulate instead of actually experience. That is the fracture I think that we have to heal. See, at Uber Bintegers, I believe that integrity and intimacy are not luxuries. They are the only sustainable path to feeling whole. Integrity is living in alignment with what's true inside us and outside us. And intimacy is knowing for being who we really are. But neither of these can actually grow when we're addicted to applause. Neither of these can thrive in the shadow of performance. And so we begin with the courage to name what's real. We're lonely. We're exhausted. And we're done pretending that admiration can satisfy this hunger that we have to be loved. And what we need isn't more attention. What we need is really to be witnessed, to be heard in our silence, to be felt in our presence, to be invited into spaces where we don't have to earn belonging by shining, where we're allowed to just simply be. See, we were never meant to be a brand. We were meant to be known. And reclaiming that truth is not easy. It means we're facing the parts of us that we've numbed. It means that we're being honest about how often we perform connection instead of actually living presently in the midst of it. But it also means recovering the kind of intimacy that doesn't require an audience, the kind of love that stays when the show ends, the kind of presence that doesn't ask us to sparkle, just to show up. That's, I think, where we ought to begin. There's this subtle cruelty to performance-based connection. It often looks like love and even feels like it at times until it doesn't. And by that time, we realize we've been chasing mirrors instead of relationships, and we've built this life around being wanted but not necessarily received. This is the kind of hunger that attention cannot solve. It's the kind of pain of constantly offering the best version of ourselves, only to realize we're still lonely when the room claps. And for many of us, this started early. Maybe we were praised for being agreeable, maybe for being helpful or being talented. Maybe the people around us liked us when we didn't rock the boat. Perhaps the smiles came quicker when we were funny instead of frustrated, or when we were wise beyond our years instead of being needy, or useful instead of being human. And so we learned quietly, efficiently, that love was conditional, that being wanted came at a cost of being whole. And these lessons are rarely spoken out loud, are they? They live in the pauses, in the way someone changed the subject when we cried, in the way that our big feelings were met with, "Oh, you're so dramatic," or in the way that disappointment was met with silence or retreat, in the way that joy had to be toned down to be palatable. And over time, we learn not just to perform, but also to protect ourselves from intimacy by staying in character. And we learn to gain safety through strategy instead of honesty. But the thing about strategy is this. It works, like I said, until it doesn't. There comes a moment, often late at night, usually, often after a milestone or when things should feel good, when the applause may fade and we're left alone with this unbearable feeling that nobody still knows us. That maybe this whole thing, like the charm, the competence, the carefully curated identity, was maybe just a shield. And the real us is still waiting, still wondering if we're worthy, even when we're not impressive. It's no wonder that so many of us feel unseen, even when we're in the spotlight. We're visible, but we're not vulnerable. We're accepted, yes, but not for the parts that really matter the most. And that dissonance starts to weigh on us. it starts to question, why does love feel so far away even when people seem to like me? Why do I feel so alone in the relationships that are supposed to make me feel safe? And why do I feel emptier the more that I succeed? These aren't questions of failure. These are symptoms, if you will, of disconnection from ourselves. And healing them does not begin with earning more connection. It begins actually with unmasking, with slowing down the performance, with stepping out of the character that we've been playing just long enough to ask, what part of me have I been hiding in plain sight? Or what would it mean to stop impressing and instead to start revealing? It would mean becoming honest about the places where we flinch, or the ways that we edit, the moments that we deflect with humor or silence or competence or being chill. It would mean being willing to be received in our mess and not just in our moments of triumph. And here's where most of us get stuck, I think, because being known means we're being reachable. It means someone could come close enough to hurt us. It means that we'd have to trust that they wouldn't run away when we're not okay. It means admitting that we're not as invincible as we appear. And that kind of risk feels unbearable, especially if we've never had anyone stay when we didn't have it all together. So we retreat into what's safe. We give people access to us, but not necessarily entering. We tell stories, but we don't actually offer soul. And we flirt, but we don't expose longing. We host, but we don't receive. And slowly and quietly, we forget what intimacy even feels like. We confuse admiration with affection, and we call attention connection just so that we can survive. But something inside of us knows better. Something inside of us knows that the body does not lie, that the tension that we're feeling when someone compliments us, it doesn't really land. And that's not modesty, it's dissonance. That's the part of us whispering, they don't see the real you. And that silence that we dread after the applause dies down, that's this voice asking, is this all there is? See, we don't need more followers. We don't need more validation. We don't need to be more authentic online. I believe what we need is to remember how to risk being seen for real. We need to begin telling the truth again, not just out loud, but also on the inside. I don't feel safe, or I'm exhausted. I don't want to be adored. I just want to be held. I don't want to impress you. I just want to feel like I belong. I want to stop curating my soul and start sharing it instead. See, this is the kind of courage that will undo decades of performance. That's the kind of truth that will disrupt our addiction to attention. This is the kind of honesty that will usher us into this intimacy that we are longing for. And this is the bridge that I want to build here. See, the tragedy of attention without intimacy is that it slowly teaches us to settle for being celebrated instead of being truly known, to settle for attraction without attunement, to settle for chemistry without care, and perhaps most dangerously, to settle for being half seen by others because we've been half showing ourselves. It's not that people don't want to love us, it's more so that we haven't actually given them a real chance to do so. This is what happens when we start treating intimacy like it's optional or worse, like it's dangerous. And for many of us, it was dangerous. Like there was a moment when we were vulnerable and someone used that against us or ignored it or mocked it or left. So we internalize the message so subtle that it's almost invisible. And that is that honesty costs too much. That vulnerability is a liability, and that composure is safer than closeness. And from that moment on, we learn to be palatable instead of being present. But there is no intimacy in palatability, is there? It's just performance. And there's no nourishment in performance. It's only like starvation in disguise. And this is why so many of us are surrounded by people and we're still starving for true connection in the midst of those people. Because presence isn't the same as intimacy. And applause is not the same thing as love. And the longer that we conflate the two, the more estranged we become from our own longings internally. We convince ourselves, I don't need much. I'm actually good on my own. Or I'm just not the type of person people open up to. Or I just don't want to be a burden. Do these sound familiar to you? See, underneath all of this, self-sufficiency is often a quieter desperation that says, please, let someone see me, like the real me, not this polished, charming, high-functioning version, just the true naked me. This is the deeper ache, I think, that we rarely admit out loud. Many of us don't even believe that we are lovable unless we are useful, unless we are impressive, unless we are admired, unless we're giving more than we receive, right? And so we become excellent at gaining affection through our outputs. We become irreplaceable, but not held. We become essential, but not loved. We're respected, but we don't feel safe. And so we start to believe that if someone really saw us, the messy, the moody, the inconsistent and afraid parts of us, they would run. And so we keep the mask on and we stay in character and we offer almost everything. But intimacy does not live in almost, does it? Intimacy lives in the parts that we're afraid to name. The awkward confessions, the trembling disclosures, the imperfections that we're convinced will make people turn away. And the only way to access that is to risk something real. Here's the hard truth. Intimacy is not found. Intimacy is built. It's not discovered like a treasure. It's forged like trust is. Over time, in small, brave moments of honesty with people who are capable of receiving what we reveal. And that requires discernment. See, not every space is safe. Not every person is ready. But some are. And the more we choose courage over comfort, the more we build a life where our belonging is not tied to performance. This is how intimacy begins to return. Just one brave sentence at a time. The kind that says, I don't have it all together. Or I'm struggling and I don't want to pretend that I'm not. Or I crave connection more than I admit. I want someone to know me, not just want me. I'm tired of impressing people who never ask how I'm actually doing. These are not signs of weakness. These are invitations, if you will, to intimacy. And here's what I know. The people who are capable of meeting us in that honesty will never be drawn to the version of us that we've been curating. They don't want the highlight reel. They want the human at the core. But we'll never experience that kind of relationship until we make a terrifying decision that is actually quite freeing. And that's to stop offering what we think people want and instead to start offering what's actually true. So yes, we'll lose some attention. And yes, people will fade. Yes, it might even get quiet for a while. But what we gain is worth it. We gain alignment. We gain integrity. We gain dignity of being known in a full and deep way without needing to contort or convince others. And it's in this space that we finally begin to heal. It's in this space that we stop trying to earn love and instead just receive it. We stop performing and we start connecting. We stop starving and start feasting on the kind of nourishment that only honesty makes possible. This is not a quick shift. It's actually a deep reorientation. But it's the only path to the kind of life where attention is no longer our currency because intimacy has now become our home. See, there's a grief that comes with letting go of attention. And it's the grief of realizing how many people we kept in our orbit, not because they saw us, but because they clapped for us. And how many roles we held on to, not because they fit, but because they fed us just enough to keep starving. See, the shift from attention to intimacy feels a lot like withdrawal at first. We're detoxing from being seen generically so that we can actually be known specifically. And this can be disorienting. We miss the dopamine rush of being liked. We're going to miss the safety of being vague. We'll miss the illusion, if you will, of closeness that never actually required us to show up in the first place. But listen, if you stay with this, if you resist the urge to return to the familiar flattery, it's there that you'll start to notice something else emerging, and that is this stillness, this softness, this safety, and eventually, like, real connection. Not because we contorted ourselves into someone lovable, as much as because we stopped contorting in the first place at all. It's not because we became perfect, but because we became honest. This is what intimacy really asks of us. Not performance, but presence. Not polish, but permission. Permission to bring the parts of ourselves that don't know how to be impressive, that don't know how to always say the right thing, that pain or ache for closeness, but the fear of the cost. See, these are the parts that aren't obstacles to connection. They are actually the pathway, but only when we have the courage to lead with them. And here's where this shift becomes spiritual. And that's when we begin to trust that we are lovable in our wholeness, not just in our excellence. It's where we stop seeing people as audiences and start see them as fellow companions, where we stop trying to be adored and instead start trying to be aligned with truth, aligned with our needs, aligned with people who value depth over dazzle. And in that shift, we begin to attract what we've been starving for all along. And it's not fans, but witnesses. Witnesses to our stories. Witnesses to our becoming. Witnesses to our mess and our magic without the demand that we perform to keep them close. But intimacy requires something more from us that attention never will offer, and that is it asks us to stay even when it's awkward, even when we feel unworthy, even when we want to run. Because every time that we choose to stay, we were building this muscle. We build tolerance. We build a kind of presence that transforms our relationships from transactional to transformative. See, this is not about abandoning excellence. It's more so about untethering our worth from it. It's about remembering that attention is a spotlight, but intimacy is a home. And we don't need to chase the light when we've learned how to light up our own fires in quiet ways, in the presence of those who stay close, not to be impressed, but to be present. This is the difference between being adored for a moment and being known for a lifetime. And that is what we're building. A life where connection is not contingent on performance. A community where vulnerability is not punished, but is protected. A relationship to ourselves that honors not just our strength, but also our softness as well. Here at Uber Bintegers, that's the identity bridge that I'm committed to building. Not just saying that we value intimacy, but living like we actually do. Not just helping others find their audience, but also helping us all to build a life of alignment. And not just calling people into greatness, but calling them back into their wholeness. Because the world is not changed by those who are just merely seen. It's actually changed by those who are known. And that begins with us. So here's where we end today's episode. Not with a takeaway as much as a return. A return to the question of that we've probably been avoiding beneath the applause and the approval and the performance. The question is, do we want to be admired or do we want to be loved? Because we can't have both. Not at the same time. Not from the same people or not without cost. But we can choose. And we can choose the slower road, the deeper yes, the quieter spaces, or we can choose the kind of relationships where we don't have to wonder if we're enough because we've stopped performing long enough to find out just that. And yeah, we can choose again to be seen in the only way that ever nourishes. That's in a full and vulnerable and honest way. That's how I believe we stop starving, and that's how we, in essence, come home. I hope this has served you well. Let me know if some of the ideas struck a chord with you. I'd love to hear down in the comments below. I'll see you in the next episode.